Ocean Vuong once expressed his dissatisfaction with the coming-of-age novel, specifically the apparent necessity of a violent rite of passage and by extension a villain. Even the great Bildungsroman author Charles Dickens often used caricatures of class and gender. Even in a more nuanced book like Great Expectations, we have the character of Orlick, who is unequivocal in his hatred. I think Vuong was dissatisfied with this notion because he saw no truth of it in his own life, which is auto-fictionalized here in On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. Because to have a clear villain is to simplify an inherently chaotic and complicated experience. He even mentions this at one point. He says, "I needed this act to have an author, a consciousness held in a defined and culpable space. For once I needed an enemy." Because there is no villain, no easy character in a language barrier between a mother and a son. There is no easy villain in picking up the pieces of trauma in the aftermath of a war, especially when that violent war was instrumental in our protagonist's little dog being born. There is no easy villain in the sustained trauma of the working class America and working tirelessly in factories and nail salons. There is no easy villain in being an outsider and feeling that you are halfway inside the world. There is no villain, but there is a necessary rebellion against some antagonistic force. The Goliath of this story is fleetingness, and Vuong's slingshot is his words. The form of the novel is a letter from a son to their mother, but this itself is revealed to be conceit, for his mother cannot read English. The conceit alone is poignant. Little Dog is not the first storyteller in his family, but the second, the first being his grandma, who tells these amusing stories that weave in and out of truth and fiction, and are just as amusing in the way they are told as they are the events they are being told of. But he is the second and not the third storyteller in his family, and his mother is sort of caught in between. Her immigration is a migration from the war in Vietnam, which stints her tongue, to working class America, which cuts it out entirely. Vuong writes, "What if that tongue is not only the symbol of a void, but is itself a void? What if the tongue is cut out? Can one take pleasure in loss without losing oneself entirely? The Vietnamese I own is the one you gave me, the one whose diction and syntax reach only the second grade level." In the story, Little Dog plays the role of a translator, and while this is literal, there is also a figurative element of translation in the mere writing of the story, which is that he is attempting to translate the trauma of his mother, who cannot articulate it herself. I think literature is set apart from other forms of art in the sense that it is uniquely experienced privately, and thus the way we process literature is akin to the way we process life, which is internally. And so I'm uniquely interested in the ways that literature expresses loneliness and isolation. And it's especially interesting when coupled with the immigrant experience here. I especially love this line: "The boy, he watches his mother watch nothing, his entire self inside the phantom oval of her face, invisible." There are several layers of linguistic distancing here. First, Little Dog addresses himself in the third person. Then he abstracts himself and iconifies his mother, joining them in an unspoken solitude, which I think is very true of the shared but unspoken loneliness of the immigrant experience. There's an especially heartbreaking scene where Little Dog is still unable to speak English, and a classmate expresses a rare act of kindness by sharing him a bit of his lunch. And Little Dog doesn't know what to do, and he sort of just follows him around, and he says, "Let me tie my shadow to your feet and call it friendship." This is contrasted with his relationship with Trevor, who is almost at the opposite end of the American experience as this archetype of Southern masculinity. In their scenes together, it sometimes feels like all of life is contained in their relationship, all its confusion and reluctance and passion. It's also where Little Dog first feels seen. There's this beautiful line: "In a world as myriad as ours, the gaze is a singular act. To look at something is to fill your whole life with it, if only briefly." And of course, this idea of brevity and this idea of a gaze is very relevant to what Vuong is trying to do with this novel. If a gaze can freeze time and fill one's whole perception with it, if only momentarily, perhaps literature should be like a gaze too. Vuong's intentions are made most clear with the line, "I never wanted to build a body of work, but to preserve these, our bodies, breathing and unaccounted for inside the work." Somewhere in the novel, Little Dog naively says that surviving is changing without disappearing. Specifically, it's waiting until the storm passes over and finding that your name is still attached to a living thing. The storm in this novel takes several forms. There's the opioid epidemic that takes Trevor. There's aging that takes Little Dog's grandmother, and the PTSD that takes his mother. The storm passes only to leave fragments of names left in the void. And so his coming of age is synonymous with a coming to terms with death and finding the words to express this, articulate the trauma of those around him who couldn't do so themselves. There's this especially poignant moment where Little Dog realizes that the Vietnamese word for missing someone is the same as the one for remembering someone. When his mother asks, "Do you miss me?" he has a fright. The novel is almost a response to the double meaning of this question, which is, do you remember me? Little Dog's coming of age is completed in this realization. All this time I told myself we were born from war, but I was wrong, Ma. We were born from beauty. Let no one mistake us for the fruit of violence. But that violence, having passed through the fruit, failed to spoil it. And so Little Dog's coming of age is not just an act of resurrection, but an act of revelation too. Vuong's writing is a room in which these lives are immortalized and allowed to exist in all their complexity and severity, and most importantly, the beauty that is revealed by Vuong's writing.